Happy Monday. And for us, it's happy NFL playoff time because somehow my Steelers survived one of the wackiest Sundays in NFL history. And Drew's Cowboys took care of business a long time ago and hung like 70 points on the Eagles to close out their regular season. But anyway, we've got a lot of baseball to talk about today. Welcome back to the episode of the 5-Tool Baseball Podcast, episode 35. We're continuing our series with S2 Cognition. We're so fired up to share what we've been learning about for months now about why S2 Cognition, we believe, is a true game changer developmental tool and evaluation piece for players of all ages in the game to really help players, coaches, everybody better understand why players are the way they are. And we're going to have another guest on today. We had the doctor on last time, Dr. Scott Wiley, some of the brains behind the neuroscience and neuropsychology. We're going to have the baseball guy on today, Paul Phillips. Played 15 years of professional baseball, played in the big leagues for years with multiple teams, was a AAA hitting coach, was a catching coordinator, coached Division I baseball at Lipscomb. And he is a baseball guy, but he's a baseball guy that's now out of professional baseball because he believes so strongly in S2 Cognition that he is their head of baseball and softball development on that end. So excited to talk to Paul today, a guy, Drew, that you know very well and have spent a lot of time with, more time than I have, as we're testing more people and getting this out into more of the baseball audience.
Yeah, well, I think it's safe to call Paul a doctor of baseball.
Yeah, there you go.
So, but yeah, no, it's loved working with Paul. You can see the passion that he has for development. He obviously left, what are some very coveted jobs in the baseball world to work with S2 because of his belief in the product. And, I think we'll get to hear him talk about that a lot. It never gets old watching him go over results with kids and asking them, hey, I would guess, not having seen you, that you probably do this a lot or that a lot. And their minds are blown. And, it's fun because he gets a kick out of it and it's fun to watch. And it'll be interesting to hear him talk about his experience with that and how he's worked with S2 at all different levels, whether it's high school kids, college kids, or at the pro level. So excited to hear what he has to say. And, episode 2 of a 3-part series for us, and just trying to help explain and get the word out about this product and how kids can use it for their development.
Yeah, and if you missed our previous episode with Dr. Scott Wiley, a quick scouting report about S2 Cognition, basically, 30 to 45 minute tests on a computer, and this machine is just super highly tuned with the mouse and things like that to basically eliminate as much time between your reaction and clicking and things like that. And it's measuring basically how your brain processes. And it's specifically related to certain areas, whether it's like impulse control or timing or those sorts of things. And, they've had this science available for a long, long time about how the brain works and how it processes these decisions in milliseconds and things like that. But nobody's really been able to quantify that data as it specifically relates to baseball. So you take this test and it's an assessment. And at the end of it, within minutes, you're basically presented a bar graph about how you score in the main areas. And like Drew said, one of the most eye-opening things about us at 5-Tool is when we got to start seeing this in action, and Paul would get these assessment scores. And he didn't know these players. In many cases, he didn't even know their names. So it's not like he's being tipped off about what kind of player this guy is. And he's going through this graph and he goes, well, I bet you're good at this. I bet you struggle with this. I bet you get to the cage and or the game and you might say this about, man, I just missed that pitch, or man, I couldn't lay off that pitch. And the kids, their eyes are just like, how did you know that? How did you know this information? So it's S2 Cognition, and it's an assessment that basically measures how your brain specifically processes and how it works and what are its strengths and what are its weaknesses. And it quantifies that data, and it helps you as a baseball player explain why you are the player that you are and why you perform the way that you are, and maybe, and not maybe, most importantly, how you can get better as a player by targeting those specific areas.
Yeah, it's just an incredible tool for development, for all ages really. And you take this information and allows you to practice more efficiently. So there's value for the coaches and the players. So excited to hear Paul talk about it.
Yeah, let's get to it. Here's our interview with S2 Cognition's Paul Phillips. Happy to be joined by S2 Cognition's Paul Phillips. Paul is a director of baseball and softball development at S2 Cognition, and we had Dr. Scott Wiley on last week. But Paul, you're the baseball guy. I mean, you spent how many years in professional baseball? I believe it was 15 years. You played in the big leagues with multiple teams. I think you were drafted 3 times. You've coached at D1 level. You've been a catching coordinator. You've been a AAA hitting coach. Like, you are a baseball guy. So you've probably kind of seen and heard a little bit of everything as it relates to technology and development. And here you are as like the chief baseball ambassador for S2 Cognition. What was it about this product, this technology, this philosophy that really connected with you and made you believe, okay, this is something here that could be groundbreaking and could be really at the cutting edge of player development?
Well, that's a great question, Dustin. One of the things that I don't know if Dr. Wiley talked about, how we met, but when Brandon and Scott came to Lipscomb University when I first started. So I'll back up real quick. So like you said, I played 15 years of professional baseball. When I was finished playing, I took a job at Lipscomb University. And so I did that for 3 years. I was the hitting coach, catching coach for the university. And that's where I met the guys at S2. And so they came over to the university and they put my team through the evaluation, and me coming straight from pro ball, I was kind of like, hey guys, let's see what you got, because I just left the best of the best, right? Let's see what you got, right? And so they come in and they test my team and they started telling me about some of the players. And I thought I was getting punked by my assistant coach. I thought he had kind of prepped them and they were videoing me somewhere. I looked around the room for a camera. I'm like, am I getting punked here? Because these guys were telling me how my players play. They didn't even know their names. You know what I mean? And they didn't know anything about these kids. And so at that point, they truly had my attention, right? And I'm like, okay, now let's see where this goes from here. They started telling me, hey, this player's going to probably have some swing and miss. He's probably not going to be very good at this and that. Probably not going to get good jumps in the outfield. Probably not going to have routes in the outfield that you're going to want to see. Probably going to have bad base running problem. I'm like, how do they know all of this stuff? Right. And so they start explaining the way the evaluation works and the way that the assessment takes place and what they can extract from that information, and then just apply it to whatever context we need to use it in, which for us obviously is the game of baseball. And so they had my attention instantly because they knew how these players played with never seeing them play. And that actually it was a little freaky actually, because, I've never seen anything like that before. Playing for 15 years, I've seen tons of technologies, like you've said, but this was something that I'd never seen before. And this was something that as soon as they started explaining it to me and breaking it down in layman's terms, it made so much sense. When you're talking about, hey, this system of the brain is responsible for these types of actions, and we can quantify and tell you how well developed that system is. Well, if it's low, they're going to struggle with actions like that. If they're high, they're going to have a higher chance of being able to do those actions and functions on the field better. I'm like, well, that's not like rocket science. That makes sense, but I don't know how to measure the brain, right? I just know how to coach baseball. And that's what these guys helped bring to me was, this is how we measure the brain. The brain's responsible for everything. And so once you understand what system is causing the issue on the field, you can help that player that much faster. And I was in at that point because it was about helping these guys understand what they bring to the table, who they are, who they're not, so that we can make them better at who they really are and help them unlock their full potential. That was the easiest sell for me. And so we used it for, I think I met them my second year at Lipscomb. We used it my second and third year at Lipscomb. And then I went to pro ball, went to the Marlins. Joe Dillon and Mark Del Piano brought me to the Marlins to be their AAA hitting coach, brought S2 with us to the Marlins, helped understand why the player development there was for the players and the organization, why they were kind of scuffling at the time, and so we took this information, tested everybody in the organization, and started writing more detailed player development programs for each individual. That was the coolest thing, because we're not doing this training under an umbrella anymore. It's this kid needs this kid needs that. We're not training them the same way, but then we can start grouping those guys that had the same deficiencies together and maximize our work and maximize our time in the cage and on the field with these players. And watching those players get better instantly, it was, taking it to now pro ball. These guys are going, holy cow, where is this? I've never heard of this information, never seen anything like this. Where did you find these guys? Right. And so it's just something that's been very helpful, but it's been not around until now. And that's the coolest part. And so with that being said, took it from the Marlins. I was the hitting coach in AAA my first year in 16 and 17, 18. I was a catching coordinator, used it in catching. It makes a huge difference when it doesn't matter what position you're playing. When you understand how a player functions and how his brain works, it just helps everybody all around. Right. And so after that, I actually was approached by Scott and Brandon and Tom, the CEO, to come on board and run the baseball, softball division and help with the development part, because the assessment, that it's nailed down. I mean, they understand how to measure these systems of the brain, because that's what they do in their day jobs, right? They understand these things. And so, but at that point, it was, what do we do about it? And we wanted to get together and really put together some player development and some training to help these players maximize what their results say, right? And that's what we wanted to do. I mean, could you imagine if you went to a doctor and he goes, hey, you got strep throat, patted you on the back and let you leave? Right? It's like, if he never gave you anything to help you get better, it's like, what's the point of going? And so that was one of the things that we were really wanted to focus on, was the player development side, and help people understand that just because we assess it doesn't mean it stops there, right?
Yeah.
We help with the player development piece too.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about the assessment with Dr. Wiley. So for kids that are going to take this assessment, they take the assessment, they get the results. What do some of the programs look like from there? And touch a little bit on, for some of the coaches listening, what kind of drills you look at doing, because I think a lot of people see this and, it's pretty revolutionary product, but, with that come normal baseball drills. I think that was, for me, that was one of the selling points, is that this isn't reinventing the wheel on the actual drills. It's stuff that people have seen and can do in their backyard or cage. And, it's just kind of looking at it as a different way to organize a more efficient training program.
Drew, that's exactly right. So, one of the things that we look at is when we talk about our systems of the brain that we're measuring in the assessment, when we talk about timing control, that is a specific system of the brain that is responsible for when do you actually swing the bat? When do you pull the trigger to swing the bat? Well, in analytics on the baseball field, that is related strictly to contact rates, right? And so when we're talking about, how do we help a player get better? Now it's like, well, what are we trying to get better at, right? We want to see this player, he just swings and misses too much. Okay, well, let's look at his report and see what system is underdeveloped causing these issues. And when we see that, and if we see that their timing control score is low, we can start putting together programs for them to help raise contact levels. Okay. And we're not just talking about making contact with a ball, right? We're talking about raising it from soft contact to medium contact to hard contact to lowering their swing and miss, right? And so it's like you said, we're not reinventing the wheel with all of these drills. We're just making them a little bit more specific to isolate one system at a time. We're not trying to do 2 and 3 and 4 systems at a time in the very beginning, because if a player is deficient in a certain system, it's not their fault. We have to help them understand how to crawl before they walk, before they run. And that's why we isolate these systems in a very structured way, to where, speaking of like timing control, everybody's heard of doing the 3 and the 4 plate drills. That's not groundbreaking, right? But when you understand which direction they need to be going more than the other, that can help change how many reps they get in the direction that they need specifically for them. In a secondary measure, in the timing control, what we can do is pull out whether a player struggles catching up to a fastball after an off-speed pitch, or waiting on an off-speed pitch after a fastball. We can help you understand who those players are. And then if a player struggles catching up to a fastball, when you do that 4 plate drill, you start them at the plate furthest away from the pitcher. Whether it's front toss, whether it's pitching machine, whether it's full-on guy throwing the ball, batting practice, and then hit 2 pitches and step up. Everybody knows when I step up, I've got to swing sooner because the ball is going to be on me quicker. That's the beginning of a progression. There's not just one drill we're talking about here. It's a progression to lead to a transferable pathway to help performance get better. That's what we have to make sure that we do.
And speaking of that, I mean, you've been able to put this into actual practice, with your time at Lipscomb,
Yes.
with your time with the Marlins. How much did this information help you as an instructor with the development side? I mean, we know so much of this game is failure, but now you're armed with the actual data information about maybe why that failure occurs. Like, I'm sure for you, it helped you be a more efficient coach, and it probably helped you with those relationships in terms of how you relate with your players, because suddenly you guys are on the same page, as opposed to having that guesswork. Like, okay, I know you don't hit this pitch. We're just going to work at that pitch. But now you actually know why a guy doesn't hit that pitch.
That's right. And one of my favorite stories is when you sit down with a player and they look at their profile. It's not uncommon to see high scores and low scores and them be a good player. It's not uncommon to see that. The issue is everyone gets drawn to their low score, right? What is that? Why do I stink at that? Well, it's not your fault. It's what mom, dad, and God gave you. You didn't ask to be your certain height, right? You didn't ask to have hair on your face when you were in the 10th grade versus 12th grade. It's just, that's how you developed. And what we're trying to understand with the assessment is we're finally helping you see where your brain development is at that current state. And so we take that and then we sit down with players and we say, hey, here's where you are. If we don't want this lower score to show up in a negative fashion on the field, we need to start training this way. And a lot of the times the player's like, okay, let's do it. And they'll get in the cage with us, and it's hard. It's not, the drill sounds very easy, but it's not easy for them to accomplish that task because they are deficient in that system. It's underdeveloped and it's not their fault. And you have to remind them of that. It's just, if we don't want it to show up in a negative fashion on the field, we have to continue to train this way. One of my favorite stories was when I was with the Marlins. I had a player and I had his report. I showed it to him. We started talking about it. And I said, let's go do the stuff in the cage. We gave 5 minutes of warm up, 10 minutes of really diving into the hard training, and then 5 minutes of feel good, get ready for the game and go out and play. He broke 3 bats in that 10 minute of working hard. And he's like, man, I don't know if I can keep doing this. It was hard, right? Because I was taxing him in the system that he needed to get better at. And it was changing speeds on him and changing pitch locations on him. And that's what his report said that he needed to do and work on those, was learning how to wait, catch up, and adapt to his timing, right? And so three bats, right? So that night he goes out facing a quality pitcher, wasn't just some slappy. Facing a quality pitcher, goes 3 for 4, homer, double, single, and a line out to second base. And he sticks his head in my office as soon as the game's over and goes, hey, what time are we doing that crazy stuff tomorrow? Right? He's like, I've already called my agent and told him to send me some more bats. We're doing some crazy stuff in the cage that made the game so much easier tonight. I'm like, that's what that's supposed to be about. Your training should always be harder than the game, right? Not to, and had one player also have a similar report, but didn't really want to dive into the depths of the training and feel all humbled, right? And so he was a guy that didn't move up. This player, the first player I was talking about that put in that hard work, spent 10 years in the minor leagues, 4th round pick, never made it to the big leagues until after he started doing this stuff. And then that unlocked his potential, unlocked something that was holding him back, and he made it to the big leagues the following season. I mean, that's something that's what you coach for, is opportunities to help a player reach his highest potential. And this was something that helped me as a coach stop guessing on what he needed and identified exactly what it was he needed. And then we put together the program for him so that he had a chance to make it.
Yeah. So, a lot of our talks and a lot of our examples so far have focused more so on the hitting side. Talk about what kind of information you get that can help on the pitching side.
So on the pitching side, they have different cognitive demands that they have to match, right? As far as, a pitcher controls the environment, hitters react to the environment. So a pitcher can take 2-3 seconds to do something when a hitter has sub 500 milliseconds to react to a pitch, right? And so I think it's 380 milliseconds to hit 95. I mean, that's not a lot of time. And I think 150 of it is the actual swing itself. So a lot of really, really quick stuff happening in the batter's box. For a pitcher, we're measuring things like focus and distraction, motor command, rhythm control, and all these are how you can you repeat your delivery? How do you make adjustments? Can you make adjustments? And then, we have a couple in there we measure their risk assessment. How risky of a pitcher are they? And there's the last one we use for pitching is instinctive learning. It's how well can they see what the offense is doing? Can they see that the offense is making changes during their at bats? Right? You may have a Friday night approach from a university, and then the Saturday approach is totally different. If that Saturday pitcher can't recognize that, he's going to get beat out of the game because he's got Friday night's approach still locked in his game plan. Right? And so you hope that someone can see that and can make that adjustment to that. But that's an implicit learning system. There's ways to get around this in training, and there's adaptive strategies and training strategies that you can use. If someone is low in instinctive learning and they can't pick up on that, well, it's great to have a catcher that can, or it's great to have the pitching coach that can, right? And so then they make the adjustments. Once you tell someone what it is, it's not implicit anymore. It becomes explicit. And so now they don't have to be harmed or vulnerable to it on the field because they already know what to look for. And so it's like sometimes we'll test coaches, and you'll see a coach maybe in his 50s that's a low instinctive learner. Well, that's not that big of a deal for him because he's been through so many situations. He has such a huge database to pull from that all of those situations he's probably going to occur are now explicit. And he doesn't have to figure it out on the fly because he's got a database to pull from already. He doesn't have to learn it while it's happening, right? And so that's something that, it's important, for I think everybody to understand is just because you score low doesn't mean you have to play poorly because of it.
Yeah. On that note, one of my favorite things is seeing you with the bar graph after a guy takes the test, and you're like reading these kids' minds and they're just blown away. Right. But there are going to be, like Drew and I say, we hope this becomes, for lack of a better term, the SAT test for young baseball players, because it can it's invaluable information. But there are going to be young players that take this assessment and they're going to see some low bars on their graph. I got to imagine from the pros that you guys test, the big leagues have guys that have low scores in certain areas, so what would be your advice to those young players that they're going to see some of those low scores? You're going to think, man, I'm just not a good player. I'm not going to be able to make it. But the reality is, you need an overall score that's pretty good. You've got a lot of time as a young player to kind of work on those things, but I got to imagine the big leagues, you guys have tested guys and they're really strong in some areas, but they're probably not good in those other areas.
That's right. And when you tell them that, those big leaguers that you tell, hey, you struggle with this and struggle with that, and they're like, I sure do. Yeah, you're right. I do. And that's something that's important to understand is, doesn't mean you can't play in the big leagues with a lower score, right? Because, when you talk about coupling some of these together, right? If you're low at impulse, but high at stopping, what that means is you might be impulsive to go after a pitch, but you have the ability to stop yourself from swinging at it, right? And so it's like, just because I have low impulse doesn't mean I can't play in the big leagues, right? I'm kind of like a walking example of that one, because I had low impulse. I chased pitches.
Still do.
Still do. No doubt. I still do. That's right. And so it's like, we're not trying to get you better on our evaluation. We're trying to get you better on the field. And I tell young players all the time, here's the thing. Nobody asks about your S2 score until you perform on the field. Mm-hmm. And you need this information to help you understand how to perform better on the field. And when you start performing better on the field, then they start asking about your S2 score. Have you had your S2 evaluation? Yes, I have. Great. Can we see it? Sure. Here it is, and then it becomes your little recruiting tool, right? But for these younger players that have lower scores, when you go to school and you're in math, when we first started doing algebra, I'm like, whoa, why are they putting letters with numbers? What the heck is this? Right? When we first started doing that, I wasn't very good at it in the beginning. And you know what my test score showed? I wasn't very good at it. So what did I have to do? I had to work more at it, right? And so I had to do more than what was just given to me in the classroom. I had to do extra work. I had to do things that I didn't really want to, but in order for me to become better at it, I had to do that. And so that's what I tell players now. It's like, listen, it's not your fault that your system is underdeveloped at this age. It's not your fault at all. But what are we going to do about it? Let's not let this keep you from being a good player. And in order for you to get better, we have to do drills that target that system of the brain so that it helps you perform better on the field. It's not something that you should be discouraged by. It's just where you are in the game of life with your development in your brain. And in order for you to become a better player, we need to address the training accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that kind of hit home for me, having come from the college game. It's just an invaluable tool that if you're a coach that's willing to put in the time to organize your players into groups and not necessarily be a cookie cutter program, you're just going to be a lot more efficient in your training.
Absolutely.
And I think, Dustin and I talked about this a little bit after Dr. Wiley got off last episode, but to me, one of the most powerful examples I've seen of it was one of the college programs that we talked to, had two guys that chased, right? Like that was their issue. But without this information, you couldn't tell why. And right. Before knowing the information, it almost made one of the guys look uncoachable to the point where they were thinking about getting rid of him. But as soon as they have this information and are able to tailor a program for that guy, and then he takes off, he just didn't have a chance to get better before, because without the information, they couldn't address and be able to pinpoint the reason why he was chasing.
That's exactly right. Think about a player who has tons of reps of hitting the ball to the backside of the field, right? In game times, it's just like, gosh, if he could just pull the ball, he would be a whole lot better, right? But he hits everything to the backside of the field, and it's like, why? It's like, it's just bad timing. Well, when you look at it and you start diving into the data, it could show its ugly head on the field, as in shooting balls to the backside of the field when you're not really wanting to. But it could be coming from two different reasons. Two different systems in the brain can be causing that. One, the motor reason, which is in the frontal lobe, which is what we coach all the time. Hey, swing sooner, right? That's a normal coach for the motor cortex being slower in timing, right? But what if that player doesn't have anything wrong with that part? What if it's the visual part that he has issues with? What if it's the visual part of perception speed, to where when the pitch comes out of the hand and he snaps his picture and snaps his photo, it's snapping a Polaroid camera instead of a high-speed digital camera, right? And so with that being said, a high-speed digital camera, you snap it out of the hand, I got what pitch it is, I see the spin, I see it again, and I see it very, very clearly so I can make a decision on what it is. But if I snap a Polaroid camera, meaning my system is underdeveloped and it takes longer to extract that visual information and process it. I can't tell a player to swing sooner, because if I do, he's now going to be swinging on partial visual information. He doesn't even know what the pitch is yet. And then he may end up swinging and missing by 2 feet because the fastball he thought it was turns into a slider because his brain hadn't had enough time to process that visual information. That's a coaching problem. That's not the player's fault. That's the coach's fault when you tell him to do that. But it's also an accidental thing because the coach doesn't know this information yet. They don't understand yet without the information. They're just guessing that it's all motor problems. It's not visual problems. His vision's 20/20. He can see the ball just fine. Doesn't mean his brain can process it quickly. Just because the brain gets clear information, which is very necessary, it doesn't mean that it's going to process it faster, right? You can take a person with 20/10 vision, 2 people with 20/10 vision. They see everything very clearly, but their brains are going to process them at different speeds. And that's something that this evaluation helps us understand is it the visual reason or is it the motor reason? You don't train them the same way. That's something that helps coaches stop banging their head on the wall, because they work and work and work and work and work with these players. Some get better, some don't. It's because of the way we train, we leave out some of these other players that need the visual training versus the motor training, but the staff doesn't know that yet because they don't have the evaluation.
One of the exciting things is the more this gets in the hands of baseball people willing to, understand and implement it, the more data you guys are getting about actual improvement. Right. Generally speaking, what have y'all seen in that regard? Because, the challenge for parents, money doesn't grow on trees. We know baseball relative to other sports can be expensive. You're probably playing with a club program. You're probably going to a facility to work on your game. But this can allow you to be more efficient at doing that and making sure you're using your time and your resources to actually get better. So what have y'all seen now that you've kind of been able to get it into the wild a little bit more in terms of the ability to actually target an area and get the player to improve in that area?
So we've done a few studies like full-on baseball cage work studies, right? And so, we're not doing the double-blind placebo effect. It was hard to do that in a game of baseball, right? Yeah. But what we're doing is we're putting guys in the cage doing a pre-cage test. So let's talk about chase rates. So we put some guys, we put about 35, 40 players through a study. We gave them a pre-cage test and said, here we go. Right? We wanted to see if we could minimize how much they chased the high fastball. So we put together a program. We tested them, put together a 4-week program, 2 days a week, 30 minutes a day. And we did a post test, same test in the pre and post. It was interesting because we taught them how to not chase that high fastball in 4 weeks. And the results on average, players got better at laying off that pitch and not chasing it by 70% or higher.
Wow.
We thought that was extremely high. So we did it again with a different group of people and changed the pitch. Not just high fastball. Now we did sliders down and out. And so with that being said, same results. 70+ % on average, they got better at not chasing that pitch. And so we know that the reason we can say we can help you stop chasing is because we've proved it ourselves in our own studies. And so we did a contact rate program. We wanted to see how we could help these kids raise their contact ability. So we put them through a pre-cage test. 4 weeks later, post test, right? Guys were getting better 18 to 20% on raising their contact, lowering their whiff rates, raising their hard hit balls. I mean, these are things that we know. They've been pushing these systems around in the laboratory on the medical side for decades, right? We're just now applying it to the game of baseball, right? And that's what we're doing here is taking these systems that are underdeveloped, putting them in a specific progression in the cage to train that system in the context of baseball. And then we can help move the needle in a positive direction for these players to perform better on the field.
Oh, this is, it's awesome stuff. We've really enjoyed getting to work with you guys and just seeing the few samples of testing groups that we've done and heard all the feedback from them, guys that have already started to improve. And, it's exciting for them. It's exciting
Absolutely.
to hear. You can hear the excitement when you talk to them of, wow, this is really working and having the effect that we saw. And, that was a big part of us getting involved with S2 at 5-Tool was, the development of all these kids. That's been Lynn's goal from the get-go when we started 5-Tool was to keep kids in the game. And,
Yes.
you can tell and you can hear it in their voice that they're excited. And when they think they have a chance to continue getting better, that's probably accomplishing that goal to keep them in the game. We really appreciate you jumping on, especially to, people that don't know this, Paul's an Alabama grad. And there's a pretty big game tonight. So we try to get you before the game instead of, having a sad enough. Paul potentially tomorrow.
Potentially.
But, yeah. So what do you got? What do you got? Any predictions on the game tonight?
Oh no, I just look, this is, from the baseball side as a coach, I can dictate what happens, right? As a fan, in the game of football, I sit on my couch and sit in the chair and I just hope. I hope that they do good.
But you do know that Alabama football has used S2.
That's correct. That's exactly right.
Okay.
I see that smile. I see that Saban grin on there.
I'm keeping my fingers
pretty good about tonight.
Now I'm keeping my fingers crossed that, you know what? The one thing that I do feel confident in is I know that they're going to be prepared, because that's something that, it doesn't matter what you do in the game of life, you have to be prepared to be successful, right? And so with that being said, I know they'll have a good game plan. I know that they have good talent, and so we'll just see where it goes from there.
Do you ever find yourself watching Alabama play football and thinking, oh, yeah, I can see why he didn't catch that ball or went the wrong way, or this guy did go the right way because he can predict stuff?
It's fun to see, like I'll pull up some of their reports and I'll see, like, holy cow, no wonder, these guys are so good, or no wonder they do that or this. And, and it is interesting to see, but, it's there's also no wonder why the Heismans are the Heismans.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so
yeah.
It's, imagine guys like Mac Jones test pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those guys all did very well, I would assume. So.
fair assumption. Yeah, you got to prepare, and you've got to know how to prepare. That's the power of S2 is
absolutely.
It's delivering information that no one's been able to quantify before, and just in a 30 or 45 minute test, here it is. I mean, I really do think, as Drew said, we're so excited at 5-Tool to be working with y'all, because we feel so strongly about the information and the developmental impact it can have, for sure. But Paul, before we get you out of here, Drew and I like to ask everybody, if Paul played in the NIL era, what kind of deals would he be trying to get? If you're at Alabama and NIL is a thing, what are you trying to cash in on your name, image, and likeness? We always tend to end up with food related answers. I think that says more about us than the other people. That's just typically where we land.
That's a great one, because I literally was sitting here thinking, like, I would love to have just maybe like a Yukon or something like that to drive to some sweet barbecue joint. Is
it Dreamland? Is Dreamland your spot, or you got another one?
No, Dreamland is phenomenal. Dreamland is a phenomenal place. Right. And so it's just, and playing across the country, throughout my career, going to rendezvous in Memphis. I mean, just there's so many. And then obviously Hard Eights is my favorite, when I reach out in Dallas. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But yeah, you can take me to any barbecue place, good, bad, or indifferent. I don't know that there's any bad barbecue. It's just some's better than others.
Yeah. Spoken like a man who knows what he likes, for sure. But Well, Paul, thanks so much for jumping on with us. Again, good luck tonight with your Crimson Tide as Nick Saban goes for national championship like 78 or whatever it is. Now I've lost track in the playoff era, but for anybody listening out there, get to S2Cognition.com. They do a great job of really breaking things down. But Paul, thanks again so much for taking the time. And again, we're really, really excited to be sharing this product with as many people as possible, because we really strongly believe in just the value and the impact it can make on young players continuing to play the game.
No doubt. Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks again to Paul Phillips from S2 Cognition. And, Paul has such a vast baseball background. I mean, 15 years in professional baseball, playing the big leagues for multiple seasons with multiple teams, Division I coach, catching coordinator, AAA hitting coach. And, he was telling us as we, wrapped up our recording, I think it speaks to S2 that a guy like that could probably have hung out in professional baseball for as long as he wanted to work in life, chose to jump on board with S2 and basically, be their head of the baseball and softball operations. I think it speaks so loudly to, how much a guy with his background believes and how much this can help players and coaches and keep more people in the game and keep more people developing while they play the game.
Well, part of what's been interesting for me and some of the testing that we've done so far is, it has a value for every age baseball player,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's beneficial for kids in high school. It's beneficial for college players. And like you talked about, it works for the pro guys too. And the thing that's interesting is no matter what level of player gets the information, their minds are blown. It's the same reaction, whether they're 15 or whether they're 25. So that I always find that really interesting, but like you said, it speaks to what Paul's background is in the game. And, it's just, he gets as big a kick helping a 15-year-old out as he did those pro guys that he worked with. It's a different type of program in some circumstances, just because of the talent level and the experience level, but the results are the same, that you're going to improve your on-field performance.
Yeah. And, the efficiency element too, we're in an era now where people want things fast, but we're also in an era too, like if you're a parent with multiple kids and, you're dropping one of your kids off at a hitting facility and you've got 45 minutes a couple times a week and how much that costs, I don't know, but you got to balance that as well. And you want to get something out of that. You want to have fun doing it, obviously, but you want to make sure you're improving. And, when he first shared with us, we were in that ballroom in Dallas at a hotel, the graph of they're actually, being able to test if guys can improve at certain skills. And when he shared that data, he said 70%, my jaw almost hit the floor because, as a guy that goes through, and I'm doing a bunch of fantasy baseball prep work right now, and if you see like a 5% gain for a hitter in like zone contact or strikeout percentage or whiff rate or something like that, that is a substantial amount of growth. So to have something to where, hey, we're going to target with these guys the ability to lay off the low slider, and you're seeing those types of gains from 2 sessions a week of about 45 minutes, that's incredible. I mean, that to me is the groundbreaking type of stuff. And it's because they have the data to say, okay, this is why you're struggling at this, and this is how we can work at it. And that to me is why this is so impactful, because it's one thing to have the groundbreaking data that just never been quantified before. But like he said, like you don't go to the doctor and he says you have strep throat. It's all right, see you later, like figure it out. Like they're providing you with the tools to help you get better at those areas.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw in my time on staff at Texas, and, I think people just across the board, whether it's sports or not, have seen a shift in the way that kids are brought up now. When we played or when we were in high school and college, if a coach told you to do something, you just kind of did it and assumed that that's the way it was done. Well, now the kids are a lot more educated. And as a coach, you're a lot more inclined to have to answer the question of why. right? And I think that that's another place that this program is so beneficial for a coach, is now you have the ability to show guys why. And when they ask, well, why am I doing this drill and this guy's doing that drill? This is why. And you have actual data to back up your programming and how you do things as a coach. So, and that's not to say that kids don't trust their coaches, but they're a lot more curious generation coming up now. And to be able to get them to believe in you and take those next steps, a lot of the time, they do need to understand why, so they can totally buy in.
Yeah. Understanding why and buying and what helps guys buy in: results. Paul telling the story about one of the minor leaguers he worked with, 4th round pick. So obviously a guy that scouts felt was a skilled, talented player capable of reaching the big leagues. And the story of the results, like, he does all that hard work and he's breaking bats. I mean, as Paul said, it's tough because it's meant to specifically target certain areas so you get better. He goes out and has a huge game, 3 for 4, barrels another ball right at the second baseman, and he's coming back in. He's like, all right, when am I meeting you in the cage tomorrow? Like, that's how you keep guys engaged in the game. You keep guys playing longer. It's one thing to have the buy-in. It's another thing to see the results to help those guys buy in. And that's why I think it could be so beneficial to players and coaches too, is it's allowing that efficiency, but it's allowing guys to understand who they are as players, but see those results. Because, you know it better than I, being at Texas for so long. Like, once guys see results, man, the confidence starts to get going. Just everything about their baseball mood can kind of change. And you start having a lot of guys in your program that are doing that, experiencing those sorts of gains. You're probably going to have a successful program too.
Yeah, I mean, the confidence in our game matters so much. We talk about all the time that it's a game of failure. And if you don't have confidence, it's why you see a lot of times big leaguers that have been successful their whole life just kind of fall off the face of the earth, because they lose that confidence and they don't know how to combat it. Then they may be done, and on the flip side, you see a lot of guys that tools wise, they on paper, they might not look like they belong. Right. And they do, because they're supremely confident. Guys like, the obvious ones are guys like David Eckstein. That guy had no business being in the big leagues physically, but once you go higher and higher up that ladder, the more you believe in yourself and just know you belong, that's a big part of it, of getting up there and staying up there.
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. And, there's been an explosion of, tech and development and things like that in the game, which is super exciting. And I feel like so many more coaches are becoming skilled in terms of the mechanical type stuff and what to look for and things like that. We've even got, emerging biomechanics data and stuff like that, stuff that you and I have both kind of looked into and studied on our own in our free time, just to better help how we evaluate players. But there aren't many things like this. In fact, I think this is the only thing like this, to where now you have something that can see what's going on inside, and see how that brain is processing. So where if you've got a guy and he's got a great looking swing, and man, like the bat speed is there, and the hips, and the way he uses lower half, and wow, he creates these loud exit velocities, but he gets into a game and those tools just aren't quite showing in games. Now you're armed with something that can explain, okay, here's why that's happening. Here's how we can better help this guy get those loud tools to start showing in games all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's quantifying what you might have thought before on paper. Right. And that's invaluable information in our sport, where a lot of times you can't. And, this is just the next step, and, kind of helping explain the cognitive abilities and putting some numbers on it. And, we'll get to hear in tomorrow's episode, the story of how we got started with S2 and, where we plan to take it from here with 5-tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And like Paul said, I think it's really important for those young kids that there's going to be some of them taking tests very, very soon. When you see that bar graph, understand that there are players in the big league playing at an extremely high level that score very, very low in certain areas. But they have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. All players do. It's really rare to have somebody that's going to test well across the board. Those are truly rare individuals. So it's just something to keep in mind. But great stuff from Paul. I mean, we get so excited talking about this stuff because I know how much we believe in it. But, you know, speaking of belief, last night I thought my Steelers are going to get knocked out of the playoffs because I believe the Chargers and the Raiders were going to end in a tie. Like, I watched that game. It was bizarre as a Steelers fan to watch that game because I couldn't I was just like stunned. I was stunned at what was happening. And then at the very end, I was just flat out confused that, you know, the Chargers called the timeout.
I want to know, we need somehow to get the true serum, to get a real answer of whether or not they were going to plan, or they were planning to kick before the timeout. I don't think they were. None of the body language showed that they were, but it kind of, you saw Carr go to the sideline a little bit whenever they called the timeout, and it looked like a switch had flipped, and he was kind of like, all right, let's do this. Like, let's go for it.
Yeah.
But it made no sense. The Steelers kicking when they kicked made no sense. Just like the Raiders kicking last night was risky. I mean, there's some risk involved to it. And, you know, I'm glad the game didn't end in a tie for your sake. But also just, you know, for spirit of the game, it would have been a shame if like, that's how it ended. And that's what got the teams there. But, you know, I could have seen an alternate ending to where if they had ended up in a tie, that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back on changing that overtime rule. You know, let's find a way to get rid of the ties.
Yeah, it's possible. Like, I think the counter to that would have been, well, if the Steelers didn't tie, they wouldn't have been in that situation, which is true. But it also kind of gets back to the greater point that we can't have games and then end in ties. Like that just can't happen. But yeah, I'm glad you used the words body language, because that was my immediate reaction when I saw that unfolding. Was the Raiders looked like they're just like, okay, this is just
after they got the first down, it looked like they were content
like
in shutting it down.
I think they're like, you know what, we're going to hand it off twice. Maybe he breaks one for 8 or 9 yards and we get into a position there. And then we kick it. But their body language looked like a team that's just like, man, we poured everything into it, and this is just got to be the way it is. And that timeout, and then Staley saying, well, we had to get our run personnel on the field and this and that or whatever. It's like, well, buddy, you don't need run personnel on the field if they're not going to run a play. Like, you don't need anything at that point. But just a truly just absolutely bizarre. There's going to be a 30 for 30 in a decade, because once guys get out of the game, they're going to start talking about, man, this is what we were saying on the sideline, and this is what coach was thinking. And this,
well, did you see Eckler? Eckler was talking to one of the Raiders, and I can't read lips, but it was because the Raiders player's face was turned a little bit, but Eckler's reaction, he looked like he had just been told that they were not going to kick it before that timeout. Yeah. I can't be convinced otherwise, but I think I would have paid a pretty big sum of money to have a camera on the McComas living room last night.
It was strange, man. It was so like, because I had just gotten to the point where I was like, oh my God, they're actually going to, like when Herbert threw that touchdown, which was an insane throw at the end of regulation. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is just going to end in a tie, because they
said this morning that they took all the next gen stats and added up all of the all 6 of the 4th down conversions and the probability that they would hit all of those. And it was something crazy. Like, there was a 1 in 8,000 chance that they would have converted all 6 of those based on the degree of difficulty of the plays and all that. I don't know how that they factor that, but that doesn't surprise me. It was insane that he hit on all of those plays.
It was nuts. And yeah, and you start watching that stuff and you're like, well, maybe this is just what's meant to be, is that these two teams tie.
I didn't watch some of the game, and I was following it along on my phone as when we got in bed, and when I saw that they scored to make it down, to get down 1 score, I was like, I got up. I told Mary, I was like, this game's going overtime. See ya. And I went out in the living room and watched the rest of the game. But I'm glad I did, because I didn't want to wake up to 100 text messages from our group message.
Yeah. But, and the unfortunate thing is that, like, people were asking me early on, like, do you even want this Steelers team to get into the playoffs? And it's
yes,
yes. Like you just don't look at Sunday's a great example of that. Did anyone think the Colts were going to go down to Jacksonville and get
that had to have been the craziest day in NFL history?
Yeah, like you just don't know in the NFL. Like, yeah, we've got a pretty good idea. Like, yeah, I think that the Steelers are going to go up to Kansas City and get beat by 20 plus, but you don't know. Like you don't. Weird things happen. Teams play well. Like you just don't know.
3 games that decided playoff teams, not even seeding, but playoff teams went to overtime yesterday.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Wild. But yeah, so we got 2 teams in the NFL playoffs, and man, heading into Sunday, I would not have expected that, and then I would have not expected that roller coaster. That like the odds of that game being the Sunday night game and still having that sort of like weird playoff tie-in implication, like, oh man. But hey, if you're a Raiders fan, I know one thing. I'd much rather go to Cincinnati than I would Kansas City. Like, go play that franchise that hasn't won a playoff game since text messages were a thing. Like I saw that the other day. Like, yeah, you couldn't even have texted anybody that the Bengals won a playoff game because texting didn't exist back then. So yeah, I'd much rather go up there and play that team as opposed to going to Kansas City and playing that team. But just a wild day. We had to talk about that. I know we've talked all baseball stuff, but the football junkies and us had to discuss that for sure. But thanks for tuning in and listening. Episode 35 of the 5 Tool Podcast. Again, get to s2cognition.com to learn more about S2 Cognition. We had Dr. Scott Wiley on last week. Paul Phillips, thank you to him for jumping on board with us. We're going to have more S2 discussion coming up, kind of, explaining why we at 5 Tool are so all the way in on this product and what it can do for players of all ages and what it can do for coaches at all levels and the development side of things like that. So we'll have more of that later this week. You can get the Podbean, you can get the Apple Podcast, but we're also publishing these on YouTube as well. So get onto YouTube and check out those videos that you can, see us talking about the product as well. So
see the sun in Dustin's eyes as the
I know that sun just popped up today. I'm gonna have
as the episode goes on.
yeah. It's getting later in the day when the sun's coming out, but maybe it'll help wake me up. But anyway, thank you for listening. Until we talk to y'all next time, take care.